Good evening. My name is Noah Herndon,
And my name is Ben Foltran.
and this is the Groundview. We stand here at the penultimate poll analysis video right before NatCon. Ben, I'm so excited to get into this.
As am I. This is going to be very exciting.
Absolutely. So just to go ahead and get started off, we're going to start with our presidential, staffer poll that we released a couple of weeks ago. It was, detailing the president's staffing paths to give us an idea of how that might influence the election. If we just want to go ahead and pull it up. And one of the big questions we decided to focus on was name recognition in that poll. Ben, are there any things that immediately jump to mind when looking at that name recognition?
Not majorly. You see a very staggered name recognition, actually, just by coincidence of how we lined up the poll. But Noah Powers securing the main name recognition, that actually follows suit to last year, how he secured the highest name recognition in the country for all candidates. And as you kind of continue to see, it continues to stagger on down. But very, very few people who filled out this poll answered none. Only one person did.
Yeah, another thing that's kind of interesting, and this is purely based off of what we can assume to be selection bias, but the fact that Isabella Goodrich had higher name recognition than her running mate Jediah Baker, despite the fact that Jediah ran last year and got more votes, who was the second highest representative elect last year in terms of vote count, whereas Isabella was around the 5 to 7 range. So that's just kind of interesting going into this year. Isabella's staffing path might have put her on a better path towards name recognition.
It's honestly very fascinating, especially to see how balanced they're going to be.
Yes, that'll be very interesting to see how that name recognition kind of counteracts against the name recognition of Heredia Gebhardt, because it's looking right now as though, Brad Heredia and Lila Gebhardt have lower name recognition, not fully, but about 4% lower name recognition than both of them. And so we'll have to see, does that have any impact come the vision primary, which, there are going to be students there, their first time at NatCon. They may not have known any of these candidates beforehand. We'll have to see if that pure name recognition from their friends may influence them come the actual vision election.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then going on to our next question, which was probably one of my favorite questions we asked this semester. We were specifically talking about, how well did voters know the candidates? And we asked from a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being you've never heard of the candidate, and 5 saying I know the candidate very well. And it was really, really interesting to see how this poll lined up because this poll showed a lot greater different disparity between them, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can see how the different bars resemble, of course, the different options that you can have. You want as little blue as possible and as much purple as possible for it to continue up gradually. And you see that type of trend with candidates such as Noah Powers, which is almost a straight, steady gradual. Bruce Bigler, you see how it starts low and continues upward. And similarly with many of the other candidates as well. Um, of course, later down the line, you start to see a little bit more of a disparity just in the lower, lesser known candidates. But that is what you want to see for if you're one of these candidates to see a steady rise in your actual graph.
Well, interestingly enough, a ticket that we know for a fact is going to make it to generals, barring some surprise writing candidate in the Compassion Party, is the Rob Timmons ticket. Yet it seems as though they're coming in with one of the lowest name recognitions and especially the lowest interaction. Sorry, the lowest interaction. It'll be very interesting to see how that ends up playing out on the general stage and how they're able to hopefully maximize their interactions and their ability of outreach on campus.
Absolutely. Of course, as you said, they are almost guaranteed generals, but how well they're going to do in generals is a massive question mark for their campaign as they have very poor name recognition.
And then the next kind of set of questions we asked was we were trying to figure out the presidential candidates' staffing paths to figure out how much that would influence. Of course, usually in the last couple of years, when a staffer staffs a specific class, that state normally votes for that staffer. Now, that's not always the case. Again, one of the outliers we saw last year was in Alabama, which was, of course, staffed by Bush Breedlove, which was even his home state, which ended up going to Goodrich Golf. So while that's not an automatic qualifier of a candidate winning a state, it's always very interesting to see how that statistic comes into play. And interestingly enough, with this specific statistic, we asked, do you plan to vote for a presidential candidate who attended or staffed your state class? It was very balanced, right?
Yes, and of course, in the poll, you can see some numbers that should be quite surprising as Noah Powers almost doubles the next best candidate. Of course, you see none being the most common, as of course, many of these staffers didn't make it to classes across the state, across the country. However, you also see some other interesting numbers that can be helpful, such as Mackenzie Smith gaining second, giving the Powers Smith campaign massive momentum from the states that they staffed.
Now, one of the benefits, or actually the detriments of this poll, the benefits to the Power Smith campaign, is the fact that those two staffed quite a few classes together. They both staffed a Texas class and then they staffed Michigan together. And actually, looking at this poll, we just do want to offer a disclaimer that Michigan was the highest represented state on this poll. And so all of those students did have Noah Powers and Mackenzie Smith as staffers. So we are expecting for that to be a bit of an influence. But it's that next question that I'm really interested in, is specifically asking, whether or not the voters plan to vote for the presidential candidate who attended their state class. And 50% no, 49% yes. That's an incredibly balanced statistic. And we're gonna have to see how that ends up playing out, especially because a couple of questions down, we asked, on a scale of 1 to 5, whether or not you were extremely open-minded to kind of switching from a candidate that had staffed your class, or if you were extremely loyal to a candidate that staffed your class. And could you kind of go into that statistic?
Yes, absolutely. Loyalty is a massive, massive component of elections and often is ignored, as of course, you'll see these different campaigns with massively different numbers in GroupMe's and in support in polls. However, on election night, you'll see many of their supporters go to different campaigns as they don't have the most loyal voter bases. And that really is something to focus on. Because of course here you see a the gradual increase up to loyalty, and with 28% of people being totally set on their campaign and will not change their minds. That is, of course, the largest group. However, there's a large, large group of people who are not there, which other campaigns can swoop up and take those voters, which will be incredibly important, especially on site at NatCon.
Absolutely, especially considering, it's 50% are either 4 likely to be loyal or 5 extremely loyal, and then 50% are 3s, somewhat loyal all the way down to completely open-minded. And so we will have to see, how much does the primary open forum influence that? And then, of course, the debates and in-person interactions are going to be a massive influence in voter mindset. And then one of the last questions we kind of focused on with this poll was asking about whether or not staff and campaign members of the different presidential tickets were on the different state classes. And in that poll, we also asked, how likely were you to vote for someone if they were supported by a staffer or a student at the state class? And this was a massively different statistic to the one we saw beforehand, with 66% yes to 33% no. Any idea what that might be the case?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, voting for somebody who you are friends with or a friend of a friend, that's going to be a massive influence. If your buddy from state class is pushing you to vote for a certain campaign or to join a campaign, you're likely to join it, as of course you're not having influence anywhere else. So seeing this number being as high as it is does make quite a bit of sense. However, seeing how there's a large majority of people who also said that they will not be influenced by this is also very important to note.
Absolutely. But even more interesting is the scale further down below, talking about, loyalty and open-mindedness, because unlike the first scale where it was gradually going up to being extremely loyal, here we kind of see, even disparity of completely open-minded, somewhat loyal, and very loyal, with diminished in between. And I think that's just very interesting that we have that disparity.
You see kind of a W there in the shape. And of course, a lot of people are going to be very loyal to the friends. Other people are going to be extremely open-minded. And then some people don't really know where they line up. So I believe that's why we kind of see that W shape. But it is very interesting to note as the distribution of loyalty is actually fairly even amongst those polled.
Absolutely. Now, moving on to our last poll that we submitted this year, the ultimate poll, the one that was, at least in my belief, was the most specific and gives us the best opportunity to look at what we can expect, One of the biggest things we targeted were the primary voting situations. We targeted each and every primary, both for presidential, senatorial, and representative. Of course, there was no presidential race to necessarily categorize in compassion, but we'll start off in vision, and quite a surprise, going into this year with the Baker Goodrich campaign actually leading Heredia Gephardt a little bit over 50% for Baker Goodrich, to a diminished minority in Heredia Gephardt.
This is actually quite a shocker and quite an upset to the polling data that we had previously seen, as most of us had predicted Heredia Gebhardt having a massive lead going into the week. However, over the past few weeks in this election season, they have been losing ground to Baker Goodrich. And this is a trend that Heredia Gebhardt should be watching out for. And especially once everybody reaches campus, something that they need to turn around immediately if they want to win their primary.
Well, part of me wonders, we had the interview with Heredia Gebhardt, if this is at all influenced by the fact that they have one of the smallest group me's going into it this year. They haven't necessarily established a big group me campaign, which most would consider to be the foundation of that campaign. And while they talked about being really intentional, I wonder if that's beginning to influence poll results, because Baker Goodrich does in fact have a bigger group me. They have a bigger campaign, like widespread base. And so we'll have to see if the intentional relationships that Heredia Gebhardt has said they're trying to set up in the group me ends up carrying the victory for them, or if their smaller group me ends up being one of their biggest downfalls.
The way that they sorted their group me this year was different to all other campaigns, as they had the different regions of the country for the smaller group me's. Now, of course, this facilitates much more personal discussion in group me's. However, it has clearly restricted them by a large margin in people actually joining their chats, as they have had the smallest chat, even though they were the most bullish campaign leading into this actual election season.
Absolutely. And what we considered kind of to be the second biggest campaign, at least heading into the election season, was Bigler Freeland in the Perseverance primary. They have the challenger, though, of Power Smith. And then looking at that primary, we see a 50-50 split between Bigler Freeland and Power Smith. And there's a bit of McDermott Grollman representation, which makes me wonder, based off of the open forum, if McDermott Grollman does well, is there a possibility that, like Ross Perot in real life taking away from George H. Bush's vote, does McDermott Grollman ultimately influence election, either by taking away votes from a particular voting base, or by some of their voters maybe shifting to a particular voting base? And we're going to really have to focus in on that, especially with Power Smith and Bigler Freeland being currently tied in the Perseverance primary.
Absolutely. McDermott Grollman are far behind. And while, of course, a primary victory is not entirely impossible for them, it's certainly unlikely, statistically speaking. And for Bigler Freeland and Power Smith, seeing as they are currently tied, those few McDermott Grollman supporters will prove to be very mighty come election, as if McDermott Grollman chooses to endorse one campaign or the other, or one campaign or the other just so happens to have a different stance that McDermott Grollman voters prefer, that will prove to be massive in primaries, as that could swing the entire election, not just in primaries, but in generals as well.
So we were just talking about the Perseverance primary for the presidency. Now I kind of want to look at the Perseverance primary for, Senate and Rep. And wow, Myra is absolutely just crushing it in the Perseverance primary, or at least in terms of our polling is suggesting.
Yes, absolutely. And going into this election, we did see that Myra Ehrenberg would likely be one of the main frontrunners, and that has only been enlarged based on this poll, seeing the massive gap that she managed to get in between her and the next best candidate, Isabel Wassel. So that is going to be very significant in the senatorial race, as she could even secure a general spot just based on the massive momentum she brings out of primaries.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is, while I won't call it lackluster, certainly the frightening statistics for Daniel Nelson, who is entering as the highest voted representative of last year, coming in as what's looking to be the fourth most popular senator in Perseverance. And getting out of Perseverance as one of the top senators is going to be absolutely crucial for anyone hoping to win that election, specifically because there are only 4 spots. So we'll have to see if Daniel Nelson can capitalize his momentum from last year once he hits the grounds at Cleveland, because right now it doesn't look that way going into it, just in terms of off-campus campaigning.
Absolutely. He has definitely fallen back in terms of his campaigning since last year, especially as he started fairly late into the season.
And we talked about Myra Ehrenberg coming off of last year, her running last year, and that influence kind of helping her this year. And then going to the rep race in Perseverance, we see an almost identical thing with Isaac Powers and Samantha Ehrenberg, two names that will sound very familiar for voters from last year, coming in and looking right now like they're leading the current Perseverance race.
This is almost certainly due to their last name and association with their siblings, as of course, Myra Ehrenberg and Noah Powers secured massive numbers and name recognition last year. They're riding on a lot of that success into this year, which has given them an immense amount of momentum into the representative race.
Yeah, and then looking a little bit further, it looks like Aiden Bellerjow, Caleb Dudasat, and Madison Hunsucker all are doing quite well for themselves. They've established, that really good pinnacle of 60 plus votes. And then immediately from Madison Hunsucker down, you see a massive drop. I think the next highest that I'm seeing is M11 with 14 less voters. So it's going to be interesting to see who fills into that, 6 through 9 spot coming out of Perseverance.
Absolutely. And of course, we cannot forget that this is not all of the representatives that will be running this year, as of course, we have missed some due to the nature of how we poll, in the addition of that there will be write-ins this year. So there could be some surprise campaigns that will sneak up and be able to take those extra 3 spots.
Oh, absolutely. We can start off with the candidates that we just didn't know were running. I remember specifically last year, Kirk Fryer, a staffer from Georgia, no one knew that he was running until he got to NatCon, and he ended up winning as representative elect, which was absolutely stunning for the Groundview, just because we had not heard of him going into it. I had personally known Kirk throughout the year, but I had no idea he was running. So for him to go in and have such a dominant performance was incredible to watch. But then in 2021, talking about writing candidates, Reese Chapman, one of the program directors this year, was a writing candidate who ended up performing at such a high level that he won representative of the Team Pack Nation as a write-in. And so that's definitely something to look out for this year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Write-ins should not be ignored.
All right, and then moving on to the vision primary for senator and representative, looking at the Senate race, it's really interesting to see because you see Tyler May, Grace Franklin, and Olivia Corsmo in a three-way race for that top senator spot coming out of vision.
Yes, and since there are only 3 of them, and the next best candidate is over 25 points below them, you will see that these candidates basically have a guaranteed spot to take their nomination in the Vision Party. And it'll be an absolute fight, tooth and nail, to get that last 4th spot.
Absolutely. And then looking to the representative race, it's the exact same thing. Elena Tanner and Joseph Jackson have established a strong lead moving out of it. And then there's a 7 to 9 way tie for that, third and fourth, those 7 to 9 way tie for those next like 7 spots coming out of vision. And so we'll have to see, candidates like Ainsley Lafferty, Elizabeth May, Rebecca Humphrey, how they're able to capitalize on being on campus and whether or not they're able to strengthen their platforms once they get there.
Yes, again, on-campus interactions are immensely important, and if they manage to capitalize on it, they will get a lot of momentum going into the election.
And then currently, it's difficult to necessarily make many claims about compassion because of the fact that we know for a fact there are multiple candidates within compassion that have yet to fully announce they're running. We don't know how many of those candidates are senators and representatives. But looking at it right now, Addison Smith, someone that I know from South Carolina, is looking to be able to advance out of primaries in the senatorial race. And personally, one of my favorite storylines, the candidate known simply as Spider-Man, is looking like he's going to make it out of the compassion primary for representative, which is very exciting.
Yes, he might see some major difficulty on site and during the election as he is going by Spider-Man. However, it certainly has gotten around that a bit of a unique candidate is running for representative this year.
Yes. And then quickly, I just want to touch on what we got for the general results, at least, trying to figure out if all the best favorite candidates make it to generals, who gets the most support. And goodness gracious, Joseph Jackson has taken that poll by a landslide. With the only candidate to get over 100 votes for representative. And then just looking over to senator, that same statistic applies. You have Myra Ehrenberg and Tyler May. I think those three candidates are the candidates to really watch going for representative and senator, going onto NatCon like improper.
Yes. Of course, we cannot guarantee any spots for everyone, as of course we can see some major changes on site, especially during open forums. However, based on our current polling data, these three candidates will almost certainly be having a fantastic shot at those final seats.
Yes. Now, to kind of wrap up this poll, one of the last big questions we asked, at least in terms of the election itself, was focusing specifically on the general results for the presidency. And we at the Groundview, we've taken the opportunity to go ahead and establish a couple of electoral college maps that detail the four most plausible outcomes coming out of primaries, which address the likely primary winners and how the states are looking to line up based off of our previous poll results from these last three polls. And as we're looking to these electoral college maps, one of the considerations we want to go ahead and voice now is the fact of there will be an obvious absence of the McDermott-Groman campaign in these maps. Unfortunately, looking at the statistics that we currently have, we do not see it as statistically probable or likely that the McDermott-Groman campaign is going to make it out of primaries. While there is always that possibility and the hope that they do in fact make it out, none of the statistics that we currently have show them making it out. And for the sake of time and for the sake of just probability, we are displaying the four most likely maps regarding the Electoral College. We mean no will towards the McDermott-Groman campaign. We wish you all the best. And we again reiterate that this is just based off of the statistics we currently have regarding primary results. Now, to hop into those, the statistics based off of primary results, we want to first start off looking at the Electoral College map for what most people assumed to be the matchup we were going to see come generals once the candidates announced what parties they were going to run in. That is Bigler-Freeland making it out of the Perseverance primary, Heredia Gephardt making it out of Vision, and Rob Simmons, of course, making it out of Compassion, barring a surprise and shocking Biden candidacy. So just going ahead and taking a look at a general overview of Bigler-Freeland versus Heredia Gephardt and Rob Simmons, of course, the immediate thing that we kind of see is the disparity between the Perseverance and Vision tickets versus the Compassion ticket. And unfortunately, this is something we see through all four possibilities. And while Rob Simmons may in fact win quite a bit more than 35 electoral college votes, we find it unlikely in most of these circumstances, barring incredible momentum shifts at NatCon, that they will have much of a winning chance come the national election. However, we are always in for surprises. Last year, Goodrich Goff was not expected to be the second most popular campaign come general election, and yet they ended up surprising us by winning states like Alabama, by taking states like Michigan. And so there was always a possibility for a ticket like Rob Simmons and a Compassion ticket to do better than we can expect going into the general election.
Yes, and especially considering how important the in-person aspect is. Of course, we have gotten a massive amount of people in our polling data. However, it does not even begin to skim the surface of all the unreached voters. These unreached voters could be influenced by any events at the actual campus itself, and we cannot ignore that.
Absolutely. And so while we use these as predictions and analysis, we certainly don't believe these to be set in stone or concrete. That goes for McDermott-Groman, that goes for Rob Simmons, and that goes for every single example that we're about to put out. Now, talking about these predictions, though, one of the most interesting parts about this map is the fact that Bigler-Freeland in this circumstance takes almost all of the Deep South, with Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee in a red block. And, with Virginia to the north, there's also a possibility where they take North Carolina, which would give them almost the entirety of the southeastern seaboard.
Yes, and something massive to note about that giant red block is that Florida, statistically based on our polls, will not go to Rob Simmons. If it does, it will entirely change the outcome of this predicted election. However, based on our data, it doesn't seem like it will be the case, unfortunately, for Brennan Raub.
Yeah, now if it does, of course, that specific switch would have Heredia Gephardt winning, or at least leading going into NatCon. However, currently with Bigler-Freeland statistically showing to be leading in Florida, Bigler-Freeland is the leader with this specific poll. Of course, Heredia Gephardt and Rob Timmons would have specific areas to gain massive amounts of voters, whether in Washington, which may be a specific state that Blaze Timmons, who used to live in Oregon, may be able to influence. And then going down south, I believe it was Brad Heredia, who I believe he may have staffed near Louisiana or interacted with the Louisiana crowd. So if he's able to gain those 8 electoral votes, that could be extremely helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Every single state counts, and swooping up all of those toss-up states could guarantee any of these three campaigns a victory.
Absolutely. And then, again, we're looking at the kind of the holes and in like the regional blocks. And Heredia Gebhardt looks like they, in this specific circumstance, have a hold over a majority of the Rust Belt, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. If they're able to pull Indiana as well, that would be a massive pull for their campaign. However, we just don't have enough data coming out of those states for these specific campaigns that indicates that they would specifically win in those circumstances. Now, looking to Bigler Freeland, this is a massive, massive, massive win for them going into NatCon with this specific electoral college map, as this is what they would like to see moving forward, is having that southern bloc, having a couple states to the Midwest, and especially if they can challenge Bradley Heredia and Lila Gephardt for the hold of the Northeast, that can prove vital for a NatCon victory. And if you're looking at this poll and wondering, okay, so what should Heredia Gephardt specifically be focusing on? Look to North Dakota, look to Montana, look to Wyoming, and look to Idaho. Those 4 states would provide nearly 20 electoral college points combined, which would more than offset the balance and give them the advantage going into this election. Now, looking to the next electoral college possibility, we looked at what if Powers Smith is able to carry the victory and perseverance and face off against Heredia Gephardt and Rob Timmons. And this is the first instance, and unfortunately the only instance, in which we see the Rob Timmons campaign take Britton Raub's home state of Florida. However, as this is a very real possibility for an election result, there is a chance that Britton Raub does in fact take his home state, which gives them a massive 17 electoral college votes.
Yes, from a Brennan Raub and Blaze Timmons perspective, they're really going to want Power Smith and Heredia Gephardt to make it out of primaries, as that is their best shot at winning the entire election, not only from Florida, but many other states that these other campaigns would have swept up, that Power Smith and Heredia Gephardt would leave on the table.
Absolutely. And, looking at it, Heredia Gephardt immediately sees more success versus Powers Smith than versus Bigler Freeland. Even giving Powers Smith, the coveted Tennessee and the coveted Georgia, they just don't have that lock on the South that we saw from Bigler Freeland. And, we see Heredia Gephardt spread quite a bit more control of the Northeast region and a bit of a stronger, that line of Missouri, Oklahoma, because we've also seen if Bruce Bigler doesn't make it out of primaries, it looks as though Bradley Heredia will take Oklahoma.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, there's many different states, like, for example, Mississippi, that will be massive states with massive electoral votes that we cannot actually chalk up to any of these campaigns. If anybody can sweep up those different states, such as Mississippi, that will be a big, big shift for this potential map in the general election.
And it's difficult to note at this point, we saw with Heredia Gephardt last time more of a reach towards the Midwest. And this time it looks like Powers Ehrenberg is going to be specifically focusing on that. But at this point, it's just too close to call to say which of these two campaigns would have the advantage in trying to reach those Northwestern states and trying to establish the final hold in, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Mississippi. We're just going to have to wait and see. And if this were to be the primary results that we end up seeing, this would likely be the closest result of the entire election if this were the outcome.
Yes, almost. If we saw a close three-way tie, that would be an amazing general election night. But of course, this is only one of our 4 very likely potential elections.
And speaking of the next of those 4, I do want to look and see, we've had Heredia Gephardt making it out. And I want to move to the first circumstance where we may have the Baker Goodrich campaign make it out. And similarly, while Bigler Freeland maintains an advantage, seeing if they make it out, Baker Goodrich actually does a fairly good job of keeping up, taking Texas, taking Mississippi, holding on to a lot of those Northwestern states with Idaho, Montana, and Washington, and then having a pretty good stint of states on the Eastern Seaboard with New York, Connecticut, and North Carolina. It would be very interesting to see. But once again, even without Baker Freeland securing that southern block, they spread out even further, going into Missouri, taking that from Bradley Heredia if he does not make it out of the primaries, and stretching into Iowa and Wisconsin.
Yes, and something important to note about this is once again, if you are Baker Goodrich, you really want to see a Bigler Freeland win, as of course we will see later on. This is their best shot at winning the general election. Even though we have them losing in this potential, it still is fairly close with a 14-point difference.
Absolutely. I mean, if Baker Goodrich were able to pick up Louisiana, Indiana, and one other state, they would be winning this current scenario. And you kind of reference this being their best possible chance as we look to our final electoral college map that we established based off of the plausible outcomes. And this is where if Power Smith makes it out against Bigler Freeland and Baker Goodrich makes it out against Heredia Gephardt. And this is the first instance in which we see an electoral college landslide as a legitimate possibility. As Power Smith versus Baker Goodrich, it appears as though these two campaigns share a lot of different states, especially to the south. And by our polls, Power Smith currently leads in a lot of those contested states.
Yes, and there are many notable states here. Of course, Michigan is shared by both Jediah Baker and Noah Powers, and that would be very interesting to see the fight on election night. According to our polls, it would go to Michigan. However, this could very easily change come election night, and it would be very interesting to watch, as this is a very rare occurrence where two presidential campaigns share the same home state.
And that then goes again, you talked about Michigan, which will be a home state battle, but specifically for the states of Texas. Because if Baker Goodrich were to win this, our current poll shows 126 to 59. If Baker Goodrich campaign was to win that, Power Smith would drop down to 107 and Baker Goodrich would pull up to 78, which is still a deficit, but is certainly not out of the realm of possibility for Baker Goodrich to climb out of that from the national election. But once again, a standard that we keep on seeing is that Rob Timmons has the most ground to gain going into this election. Now, perhaps they come in with momentum that we haven't seen, like Smith George last year. While Smith George was a powerful ticket going into last year, it could not have been expected that they would have swept all of the big states that they did, with Georgia, Florida, and Texas all voting for Smith George. And so it is absolutely possible for the Rob Timmons campaign to pull an upset and to stun us by winning some of those big states. But right now, our statistics just don't show that moving into NatCon.
Yes, and of course, the in-person perspective, if Brendan Raub is able to sweep up his home state and also secure Texas, they could already have proved a entire general election sweep just from those two states, as of course, Texas is utterly massive this year with 19 electoral votes, and Florida is very close behind with 17. This is incredibly important to pay attention to where these two states lie.
And that's when we talk about the importance of the Big Six, which was established this year. Last year, we had the Big Four with Missouri beginning to approach even closer. But now we very clearly have that Big Six with Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Missouri, and Texas. And so even if Rob Timmons were, say, to win Florida and Texas, a ticket that were set to, say, win Missouri and Tennessee, and then perhaps a middle state like Louisiana or Alabama would be right back in it against them. And so we're just going to have to watch and see at election night what ends up happening. But right now, just to tally up, we saw 4 electoral college maps, 2 with a Bigler Freeland advantage, 1 with a Heredia Gephardt advantage, and 1 with a Power Smith advantage. While none of this is set in stone, this certainly gives us a better outlook for the election and gives us an opportunity for analysis, especially going into it and looking at the in-person interactions and the specific campaign strategies that are employed once we get on campus.
Absolutely. Of course, these strategies that they employ on campus, they will be very, very important and vital to both making it out of primaries and sweeping up states in the general election.
And that's kind of one of the last things we want to focus on is just what is the general mindset going on in NatCon? Who does the Team Pack student body, at least that we were able to reach, believe is going to win the national election? And currently, similar to our electoral college polls, the majority of the Team Pack voters believe that the Bigler Freeland ticket is going to end up winning the general election. The next two biggest tickets believed to win are Powers Smith and Heredia Gephardt, but Bigler-Freeland has a 6-point lead over Powers Smith, the next biggest competitor, in terms of who voters believe is going to win this election. And then looking at it, Baker Goodrich is quite a bit down from their competitor in Heredia Gephardt, and they'll need to bolster themselves up to match up against their vision counterpart. But again, all of this is just speculation, and we'll have to see how it continues to develop once we get onto campus.
Absolutely. Of course, that last poll you referenced there is merely what people believe is going to happen. And if the majority of people believe that one campaign will win, although that majority is voting for a different one, that different campaign could almost be seen as an underdog, where the seemingly more popular campaign could lose just due to a differing mindset to what everybody perceives.
Exactly. That was something that we saw last year with the Savage Breedlove campaign, where the Savage Breedlove campaign was seen as the majority favorite going into the election. And yet it was Smith George, that second largest campaign, that ended up coming out on top. And we'll have to see whether or not a similar phenomenon plays out this year. Well, Ben, I can't speak for you, but at least for me, I'm incredibly excited to be heading to NatCon, to be able to go and meet everyone in person, and to possibly have the opportunity to continue our coverage of this election in person.
I absolutely concur. Of course, the event will be kicking off in just 2 days from now, and I cannot be more excited. This is going to be a great, great week.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, it's been fantastic to talk with you again. So excited to see you in person. And to all of y'all going to NatCon, absolutely come and visit us. We're going to be in the elections hall interacting with the different candidates and the different voters. We'd love to just sit down and talk with y'all about the ground view and about our current predictions for this election.
Absolutely. That in-person interaction with all of you one-on-one is going to be amazing, and I can't wait for it.
Perfect. Well, my name is Noah Herndon,
And my name is Ben Foltran.
and this has been the ground view.